At the time of this story, my brother-in-law was having some trouble with raccoons destroying his trash cans. He lived on a 10-acre wooded property with a creek, and my husband and I were helping him out because we run a trap line to catch raccoons for dog food. Every morning, right around 5 a.m., we would load up the trap tools and head out to check the line. We would hear sticks or leaves crunching just out of sight almost every morning, but since the area was so overgrown and full of wildlife, we always overlooked it. One morning, right before dusk while we were resetting traps, I whispered to my husband that I smelled cigarette smoke. We don't keep our guns on us at night, and it was getting dark fast, so we immediately headed out. We were both annoyed that we had to stop working early, but we were mostly concerned that whoever was out there had been close enough that we could smell them, but not see them. Being watched is always unsettling. Days went by without any more incidents, until I woke up one morning with the beginning symptoms of the flu. Well, when you farm and have a trap line, you don't get sick days, so I bundled up and we headed out. When it came time to cross the creek, I ended up staying behind. I figured balancing on a dead tree while carrying a crap ton of equipment as I was coming down with the flu wasn't the best idea. I walked along the creek and back onto the trail where I could give my husband a heads up if we caught anything. We were down to the last trap when I saw something hauling off towards my husband, so I chambered around into my .22 thinking it might be a stray dog. I was about to yell to my husband to warn him, but stopped short when I saw something else moving through the trees. There was a man less than 10 feet from my husband, hiding behind a tree while his dog growled and snapped. He hadn't seen me. I knelt down and put the safety back on so I could safely look at the guy through my scope. He was older, maybe in his mid-40s, in ragged clothes. I kept one eye on him and one eye on the dog, a large lab mix who was baring its teeth. My husband had heard the dog and was slowly chambering around in case it lunged. It wasn't until the bullet clicked into place that the man stepped out from behind the tree. He didn't speak. He didn't call off his dog. He just stood there, staring at my husband. The dog was still growling. "Can I help you?" my husband said. "You're on private property and you need to get your dog before I shoot her." "I used to hunt here," the man said. "Sir, please get your dog." "There was a deer stand here. I used to hunt here. Are you on the lease?" My husband was beginning to get defensive. "This is my brother's property and you're trespassing. Please put the leash on your dog." "I used to hunt here. You didn't bring your wife today." I saw my husband scanning my side of the creek, looking for me, before answering. "No, I didn't. She has the flu." "You need to go home to her then. You know I used to hunt here." The man whistled to call his dog, and they walked off into the woods. Not towards neighboring properties, but into the woods where there were no roads or houses for maybe 30 miles. Before he was completely out of sight, he turned back and yelled, "Tell your wife I've quit smoking." Needless to say, we quickly got the hell out of here. When we went to pull the traps out for the season, there were cigarette butts next to every single one. I've been reading a lot of terrifying childhood encounters lately, so I figured I'd share my own. My name is Matthew, and this happened to me when I was 10 years old, in the winter of 1999, just 3 days shy of the beginning of the new millennium. It was New Year's weekend, and my parents had booked a resort, so I was staying at my aunt's house with my two sisters. My aunt's house was a really nice single-story home in a private neighborhood about half a mile from Salem, Oregon. We had plenty of room to run around and make as much noise as we wanted. My favorite part of going over there was hanging out with Ricky, my older cousin that I looked up to as a big brother figure. Despite our 11-year age difference, we were very close, and we were always doing things together, like riding quads and fishing. Even if we just sat around all day playing video games on his Sega Dreamcast, I loved spending every minute with him. Sometime in the evening, my aunt told us that she was going out with one of her friends and wouldn't be back until morning, so Ricky was in charge. She left the house around 9 p.m., when it was very dark and cold outside. That was probably the only thing I didn't like so much about staying at my aunt's. It got dark really early, especially in the winter. not to mention the fact that she doesn't have any close neighbors in case of an emergency. The closest neighbors she had were an elderly couple that lived about 500 feet down the road. I was having trouble falling asleep that night, so I was still up around 11 p.m., watching Dragon Ball Z on Toonami. Ricky had already passed out on the couch, and my two sisters were fast asleep in the guest bedroom down the hall. I was usually able to fall asleep by this hour with the TV going, but for some reason I just didn't feel tired. Probably from all the soda I drank with dinner earlier that night. I had to do something to help me fall asleep. I logged onto my aunt's computer to surf the web. Back then, the internet was pretty desolate and boring, so I had my fill after a few minutes. I had been playing some flash games with moving targets, which kind of made me want to go outside for some target practice with my BB gun. Maybe an hour or so would help me get tired enough to fall asleep. I threw on my boots, coat, and hat, and went outside into the garage to grab my Daisy air rifle and a flashlight, before quietly sneaking through the back sliding door. Behind my aunt's back fence was a narrow, man-made trail that led to a big open field 200 feet away. The field was surrounded by trees and connected to a bike path for a public park about a mile away. Ricky and I would use the field for BB gun practice in the winter since the park was closed off to the public during that time of year. That night was my first night going out there alone, without Ricky or my aunt by my side. I made the trek down the trail and eventually found my way into the field. I picked up some of the leftover cans we had used before and propped them up on the plastic buckets that had been set up. After a while of shooting at the targets, I had to reload. As I was putting more pellets into the chamber of my gun, I heard the sound of frozen ground crunching to my right. I immediately stopped and looked in the direction of the sound. It was coming from the bike path. I should have just turned around and went back inside at this point, but my 10-year-old mind had no boundaries, and curiosity got the best of me. I finished reloading my BB gun and grabbed my flashlight while making my way over to the entrance of the path. I took a few steps down the path, looking around to find the source of the noise. As I was shining my flashlight around, I heard someone humming quietly in the woods. Finally, common sense began to kick in. What was I doing out here so late? I could get hurt or kidnapped. I was starting to consider turning around and running when I heard footsteps coming towards me. The light of my flashlight illuminated a figure standing about 20 feet ahead of me. From what I remember, the figure was a tall, thin female. I can't recall if she looked particularly young or old. She had long, dark brown hair, huge green eyes, and pale skin. Not ghostly pale, but sickly looking. Her apparel was odd, completely different from what you would expect a normal woman to be wearing out in this weather. She had a long-sleeved black satin dress that draped past her knees, and black high-heeled shoes. It was almost 10 below freezing that night. Why would anyone be out here this late in a dress like that? She didn't appear to be cold at all, though. She just stood there, completely still, eyes locked on mine. The clearest thing I remember about the woman was the expression on her face. She had a look of satisfaction and malice, as if she had been out there all day looking for her prey and finally found what she was looking for. It was extremely unsettling. I didn't know what to do or think, so I cleared my throat and tried to speak to her. Hello? I stuttered in a trembling voice while struggling to keep my flashlight still. There was no response at first, just pure, dead silence. After about 10 seconds had passed, the woman started to make these weird, wet, sucking noises with her mouth. It sounded like she was chewing something or puckering her lips for a kiss. She followed the disgusting noises with a wide, toothy smile, laughing under her breath as her eyes continued to focus on me. I started to get nervous and took a few steps back. She slowly took a couple steps towards me, causing me to freeze in my tracks. I watched as she raised her right arm from her side and began beckoning me over with her index finger, followed by 2 words in a soft monotone voice. 2 words that flipped the switch on my panic alarm. 2 words that are still burned deep in my mind to this day. Come here. I screamed, dropped my BB gun, spun around, and ran like hell out of the path into the field. I ran as fast as my legs could carry me. As I ran, I looked over my shoulder, and to my horror, I saw that the woman was chasing after me. I couldn't believe she could run so fast in her high-heeled shoes. I screamed louder as I approached the field. I could hear her footsteps and breathing getting closer with each step I took. I was about 30 feet away from the trail back to my aunt's house when I glanced over my shoulder again. She was too close. I wasn't going to make it. I was sure I was going to die that night. Suddenly, I heard the woman let out a loud gasp of sudden surprise, which was followed with a heavy thud. I looked back just long enough to see that she was laying flat on her stomach. She must have tripped on something and fell face first into the frozen ground. Thankfully, this gave me the advantage I needed to get back to the house safely. I couldn't sprint through the path because of the uneven ground and dense trees, but I navigated it as quickly as possible. I couldn't be sure if she was still on the ground or if she was still following me. I just needed to get to the house safely. I hopped over my aunt's backyard fence and ran to the sliding rear door. I went for the handle, but it was locked. I started banging on the glass, screaming for Ricky or anyone to let me in, glancing over my shoulder wildly the entire time, expecting to see the horrifying woman emerge from the bushes at any second. The patio light turned on and I saw Ricky run over to the sliding door and open it for me. I threw myself into the house and hugged him. I was in tears, shaking. My two sisters, woken by all the noise, ran into the kitchen to see what was happening. Ricky assured them that everything was fine and told them to go back to bed. As soon as they were out of earshot, I began explaining everything that had happened. Ricky immediately went to the front door to grab his coat, a flashlight, and a .38 revolver he kept on the top shelf. He ordered me to stay inside with my sisters while he checked the surrounding area. I waited anxiously for about 10 minutes before Ricky came back to tell me there was nothing outside, which was a bit relieving. He then told me to never, ever go outside by myself, especially late at night. I had never heard Ricky use such a harsh tone with me before, but he was right. I should have never been out there in the first place. I think Ricky realized how shaken up I was from the whole ordeal because right after his scolding, he calmed down and gave me a pat on the back, telling me to sleep in his room with my sisters for the rest of the night. We ensured that all the doors and windows were locked securely and left all the outside lights on before we went to bed. I never told my aunt or my parents what happened that night, but I probably should have. I just didn't want to talk about it anymore. Ricky decided to keep it between the two of us and told his mom that we all slept in his room with the gun on the bedside table because some coyotes got into the backyard. After my encounter with that woman, I never went back out into that field ever again. Ricky went out one last time with his friend the following afternoon to retrieve the air rifle I'd left behind. His friend, who was the son of a police officer, said that they didn't see anyone or anything out of the ordinary when they were outside. He reassured me that the lady who had chased me was probably just some lost junkie who wouldn't bother us anymore. My aunt ended up selling the house in 2003 to move to California with her new husband. Ricky had already moved out by then after graduating college. More houses had been built in the area, so the field's no longer there. I'm 26 now, and looking back on this experience, I don't believe that the woman could have been on drugs. I've encountered a lot of illegal drug use growing up, and I've seen how it affects people. That woman didn't have the look of a typical drug user. She was in complete control of her body. I still can't imagine what she was doing out there that night, but I guess the same could be said of me. All I know is that the woman clearly had bad intentions. I still get nightmares about her at least once a year. The worst ones consist of me failing to run away from her. I run down the field and she grabs me, dragging my screaming, kicking body into the darkness. I always consider myself lucky because if it weren't for her tripping and falling over, I might not be around to share this story. I grew up on the countryside, right next to a national park frequently visited by nature lovers and bird enthusiasts. It was the kind of place where you weren't allowed to bike or ride horses, but I was 10 years old and felt like it was a stupid rule, so I did it anyway. The trails were perfect, so I couldn't resist. I knew fully well that I wasn't supposed to be biking or riding my horse in the park and was caught a few times, but nothing much came of it beyond a half-hearted, "don't do it again." Of course, I would ignore the warnings every time. Until one day, something awful happened that made me stop. I come from a family of horse breeders, and when I was a kid, I would often take a horse out for a ride in the Forbidden Park. Very early one morning, the first day of the summer holiday, I couldn't help but notice how beautiful it was outside. Misty and foggy, but a sky that promised a sunny day ahead. Since it was so early, before 6 a.m., I knew there wasn't going to be anyone on the trail to catch me breaking the rules, so I set the horse off at full speed. I only slowed down when we got to a part of the trail that sloped steeply on one side, leading down to a river, because the thought of a step too close to the edge was too much, even for a kid with non-existent risk assessment. Suddenly, the horse came to a halt and refused to take another step. I grew up with horses my whole life and knew that this behavior usually indicates you need to investigate. There didn't seem to be anything wrong with the horse's hooves, but it refused to move. That's when I saw it. Someone had set a trap. A thin, sharp metal wire was strung across the trail at the perfect neck height for an adult. I looked around but didn't see anyone. The wire was so sturdily attached to two trees and impossible for me to remove, so I led the horse around it. To do so, I had to walk a bit into the wooded area on the side of the trail. That's when I heard the singing. It was the tune to an old Swedish drinking song I had heard before, but the lyrics were different and sung in a muffled, snickering voice. I only remember bits and pieces of it now, but the version I heard out in the woods translated to something along the lines of, "Hey, all you runners, come here passing, let the lifeblood pour out." As silently as I could manage, with my heart beating in my throat, I backed away and mounted the horse, hurrying back the way I came as fast as I could. I knew I had to tell someone about it, but I was afraid of admitting that I was breaking the park rules on the protected trails. Old stories about a crazy old man living in a hunter's shed in the woods came flooding back to me as I hung onto the horse for dear life. When I got home and told my brother what had happened, he was adamant about going back there with me. We found the wire trap from before, and after a while of searching, we also discovered a spear-like pole in the ground, right in a spot where you'd land if you came running and jumped over a fallen tree on the trail. That's when we called the police. When they searched the area, they found several similar traps, but no sight of an old man. The following summer, there was a big story in the local paper about spear-like poles under the surface of the water, right under a tower that was set up for people to dive into the park lake. Black garbage bags filled with big rocks were also found on the narrow bridge across the river, set up in such a way that would cause cars to fall off the road into the water. It seemed like whoever was out there was setting human traps.